Hey everyone, Kevin here, and with the turn of the new year, I wanted to do something a little bit different with my first video of 2025. This time around, I'm going to be coming back to an idea that I tried a couple of years ago. If you've been following me on Instagram, for example, you may remember this from a few years back, where I tried to complete a challenge for myself, where I went back to some old artwork that I did years and years ago, back when I was a kid, and I tried to redo it in my current style as if I was going to make this premise today. Just because I've been in a reflective sort of mood since the new year, similar to how people like to make resolutions, for example. But in my case, instead, I've been reflecting on my artistic skills and how they've developed over time, and so I decided that now would be a good time to come back to this premise and see if I can create more interesting designs out of it. So with that, let me show you a little bit of what I'm talking about. So this is the same notebook that I used when I was doing the challenge previously on Instagram. This is just an old school notebook that I had from a long time ago. I was definitely a young kid when I made this. I think this was an idea that a close friend of mine and I were making. It was probably a card game of some kind, honestly, because those were just really big amongst our friend group at the time. Ones like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Bakugan, if you remember that, were some examples. This one in particular was an idea where it was in the far distant future, and it was kind of a sci-fi fantasy premise where Earth, after its sun burnt out, I believe, if I remember this correctly, got sucked into a wormhole as a result and ended up in this other galaxy where you can see there's a ton of other planets, multiple suns even, and basically a lot of the more fantastical premises were explained by either gene editing or manipulating atoms and elements on a fundamental level. You see, I did these drawings manipulating like fire and ice in sort of this weird diagram fashion. I'm not even sure what some of these are, like electricity maybe. These are just I think the major elements. That's Earth, I think. So you kind of get the picture. This is back when I wasn't very good at drawing people yet. I was still learning that. I can tell just by looking at these that I was familiar with anime because I was trying to emulate that style. I was probably watching Dragon Ball, Pokemon and stuff like that, so I knew I liked the style, I just wasn't good at it. I can also tell by looking at some of these that I was probably also watching Ben 10, specifically the Alien Force series, because they did these similar transformation sequences, like when he would turn into different aliens, for those familiar with that. So you have these ones, for example, where characters biology and their DNA would get altered in such a way where they would be able to transform as part of the power system of whatever this series would have been. These are the two that I redid a couple of years back when I originally did this challenge on Instagram. So I'm going to flip through and pull from a couple of these other ones. Like I said, I barely knew how to draw people at the time, so these are very generic. This is kind of a Kid Icarus looking one. It's just a guy with wings, a ranger maybe. This is your generic wise old mage or something like that. This guy is a military commander. You can see I sort of understood that people with bigger muscles should have them defined, though again I didn't really know how to represent that yet. I wasn't good at anatomy. And this I can only assume is a major antagonist of some kind. It's like an archlich or some kind of undead villain of some kind. I think that one was just more gory for the sake of it. I don't know anything about this premise beyond that. So like I said, these are kind of bare bones, but I'm going to take the core aspects of this concept and the setting and story in general, and we'll see what we can do with it. Let's transition over to the actual drawing. So the first character that I'm going to cover today is going to be the more muscular military captain that you saw earlier. And I'm going to do something with him that I did with a good bit of designs out of this batch, and just make them a little more alien. I realized while going through these that despite the fact that the premise of this is that Earth has been taken to a whole other galaxy with presumably a lot of new life forms that we're not used to, I made all the characters humans. I guess I figured back then that we would be following the human perspective of it, but at the same time, I also didn't really draw any aliens, except for the one undead. Maybe I guess that might count. But for this one, I wanted to make him some sort of alien race. Something a lot bigger and more imposing than your standard human. And so to represent that, I tried to draw him in a very dynamic sort of battle pose. This one is one where it looks like he's going to be jumping midair in order to come down on a very decisive strike. And to sort of highlight the alien nature of him a bit more, I made some slight tweaks to his anatomy. I actually tried to give him like a separate set of pectorals in a way, almost like an extra set of muscle underneath his chest muscles, like as I was fleshing out his body. And I also tried to use a trope that I like to see pretty often in sci-fi premises like these, where somebody has mechanical augmentations of some kind. In this case, I made his weapon connected to his arm. I essentially gave him a giant rifle with a bayonet on the end of it as part of his arm, because I just thought that looked really cool and it framed the piece very well, where he's just kind of mid-air getting ready to swing that giant bayonet down in order to slice through something. And you'll also notice that, again, as part of his alien anatomy, I kind of made him similar to the bugbear race, if you're familiar with D&D at all. He's just a lot more ape-like, just very tall, not lanky per se, but I'd say his limbs are a bit longer than your standard human frame as well. And then I also gave him these longer ears, and these tusks, and just kind of a lot more fur here and there. Again, he's kind of a humanoid type of alien, but just a bit more ape-like. And I'd say a lot more muscular on average than your standard human. So from there, I kind of tried to flesh out his design, and one of the things I wanted to try to nail with him is just giving him a bit more personality, because I think that's something that the original drawings definitely lacked as well. In this case, I wanted to give him the sort of personality where he's just in it for the love of the game. He's always looking for the next big challenge, the next big fight. And so he's definitely the kind of character that just thrives on the front lines of battle in a difficult situation. He just jumps in and wants to have fun with it. So I gave him this like really big grin, not maniacal per se, but you can tell that he is just fully absorbed in his work, and he's just getting ready to give it 110%, which I think is really fun. Now, as part of this design as well, I had to decide what his battle armor would look like, because of course he would be wearing a set like that. For that, I took a lot of inspiration from the Warhammer 40k universe, because obviously if you've even seen anything from that, you probably know what the standard Space Marine looks like. So I definitely took a bit of inspiration from that when creating this, especially the Ultramarines. You'll see that when I start coloring it as well. Just the deep blue colors just look really good on a metal texture. I don't know what it is about it. It just kind of works. So that was something that I put into this one as well. And then on top of that, I also gave him certain attachments. Like I said, of course, the rifle was probably something I put the most detail in. You'll even notice that the mechanical bits sort of go up his arm as well, where the rifle is attached, just to give you the impression that the whole thing is mechanical in some aspect. It almost looks like his muscles on that arm are actually a bunch of like iron tubes. And on top of that, the rifle itself also connects to a pack on his back that contains some sort of fuel of some kind. I don't really have an explanation for it. It's just a bunch of sci-fi fluid. I give it the sort of texture when I'm coloring the piece that it's bubbling with something, a bunch of different green tones, for example, just to give you the idea that it's some sort of volatile substance that is allowing his weapon to do whatever it needs to do to get the job done. Now, as for the colors of this guy, I knew that I wanted to give him something similar to a skin tone, but with a slightly different hue. I ended up deciding on this yellow color because I thought making a darker version of that for his hair actually balanced out pretty well. And you'll see I also believe it contrasts really well with the deep blues that I decided on his armor, and not to mention the green that I made for some of the accents and for the fuel rods of his weapon, like I mentioned. I think all the colors that I picked actually complemented each other really well here, which in a way kind of happened on accident. A lot of times what I'll end up doing with the colors is just trying different things until I find something that I like and a combination that works. You'll actually see that with some of the pieces later. I do that quite a bit with these because they're very experimental. I'm sort of just trying different things until I find something that I like, because I'm almost giving these a clean slate. Like I mentioned, because the original designs are so generic and there's not a whole lot to them, I kind of just take the bare bones of them and build them from the ground up with what I would make today if I were doing this. So with this one in particular, I think the colors came out really well. And for this one, I added on some heavy shadows and different accents here and there, just to give the impression that a lot of him is heavily armored, and most of what you're seeing is just heavy metal. And then to top it all off, I put him in this very ashy, dark sort of desert background, because I wanted to use a bunch of oranges to sort of offset the deep blues that I made his armor, and I think that really made him pop a lot more. And just because to give the impression that it's an alien planet, I also add these little crystals here and there. I don't really have an explanation for them either. This is just something else that I thought worked well for the background. And last thing for this one, I'm going to do something that I am going to be doing for all of these, again, because I'm going to just be giving them a clean slate. I'm going to be renaming this iteration of the character from, I think it was Glean originally, to Gorix. Because again, I just feel like that is more alien, and I think it's just a more unique name. That's kind of another critique that I had with the original designs, were that I don't really know what was in my head when I made the names. They're pretty simple, or they just don't make sense to me. So I just kind of decided to redo them as well to complete these pieces. And speaking of which, let's see the finished Gorix. Now, the next one that I'm going to be showing you is actually the first one that I did for this set, and honestly might be my favorite, just because it's the most dynamic, it has the most going on, and I believe it's the one that I put the most time and effort into as well. This was the winged scout type of character that you saw earlier, and this one I believe they were male originally, but I actually changed them to a woman this time around. No particular reason, I just thought it would balance things out a bit more, because that allowed me to then draw one male character, one female character, and the last two I changed very drastically, which you'll see later. But for this one in particular, because I wanted her to be in a sort of aerial pose to just emphasize what she's able to do with the wings coming out of her back, so I kind of struggled finding a good dynamic pose that I really liked, to the point that I ended up rotating the canvas horizontal, and then that actually gave me the space that I needed to really emphasize her wingspan and get it to a place where I really liked it. And on top of that, because I had a lot more space doing that, I kind of created this backdrop, or this scene where she's essentially on the hunt and is fighting a bunch of what I would consider to be almost alien dragons. They're kind of a combination of a lizard, a bird, and like an insect or lamprey even. I don't really know what to make of them. I kind of just took a bunch of pieces of different animals and smashed them together to make a sort of alien dragon life form. Honestly, I think the design turned out really well. It's one of those situations where you just kind of throw stuff at a wall and see what sticks, and the result came out pretty well in my opinion. And another reason I wanted to frame the piece with these alien monsters is because I wanted to kind of show how some of the power systems in this setting would work. Like you saw earlier, how certain characters have the ability to transform themselves in different way, to give themselves different abilities. So that actually got me thinking about how interesting it would be if DNA manipulation was just a main power set in itself in this universe. So in order to demonstrate that, I made her wings here resemble the same wings that the creature she's fighting has, almost to give the impression that she took on some of the DNA of these creatures in order to sprout wings and sort of this clawed hand as well, as a means of fighting back. Which I thought that was just a really cool idea. I would love to see a character with that power set in action settings like this. So from there, I basically fleshed out her outfit a bit. It's kind of a combination of armor and almost like a bomber jacket, coupled with a sort of sci-fi version of a hand crossbow, or as sci-fi as I can make the general design of a hand crossbow. I gave it this sort of rotating barrel, almost like it's generating electricity in order to fire shots off, because it has to be more of a blaster in a high technology setting like this. And then from there, because she is inextricably linked to the creatures she's fighting, taking on some of their DNA, I actually chose their colors first. I went with like a standard green and purple color that I thought made sense for these very snake-like creatures, and I think that worked out really well. And by process of elimination then, I wanted to make her color scheme something that offset theirs a bit. So I gave her this flaming red hair and a lot of pinks and browns and deep purples in her outfit that I think complemented the whole design really well. And then after that, I think the thing that I may have concentrated the most on is just the amount of effects and colors that I put into the background, because again, this was going to be a very dynamic piece, I knew from the start, and especially because it's in midair and we're in an intergalactic setting on top of that, I wanted to create this just really vibrant, starry background of an alien planet's sky. And then on top of that, again, just to emphasize the height of the piece, I put these little rock formations in the background to give the idea that they're in a sort of canyon-like setting, but they're soaring above it while in mid-fight. And then after that, it was a matter of adding the harsh shadows and highlights like I usually would. And then, of course, in order to match the sort of pinkish purple lighting that would be present in this piece in such a unique setting, I kind of played around with the colors of the shadows, and I added a bit more vibrant effects to that. Like I gave her this glowing visor, for example, to help with actually surviving it, moving high speeds in midair like that. And honestly, I thought this one came together really well. Again, this might be my favorite of the bunch, though I think they all turned out really well, personally. And as I wrap this up, like the others, I'm going to be changing her name slightly. It was originally Talon, but again, just to make it a little more unique, and because I changed her gender from the original character as well, I'm just going to be calling this character Talon. And again, I just love the way her piece came out. And with that, let's see the finished product of Talon mid-flight. So the next character that I'm going to recreate is the Wise Old Elder, and in this case, this is another one that I made decisively more alien, to the point that I actually thought of an interesting way of doing this trope in a more sci-fi setting. For this, I turned him into an alien race that at some point in their history basically just uploaded their consciousnesses into this massive neural network, basically just combining all of their brains together, digitizing them, and becoming a hyper-intelligent hive mind. My thought is that this character, which is weird to even call them that considering I just described them as a planet's worth of minds all put together in one. But to that point, I think that they would essentially be a planet-sized supercomputer that would house all of this information, so that they would not only act as a source of information and strategy, but probably also acting as this home base for all of the main characters to enact whatever heroics or missions that they have to undertake. So the most difficult part about creating something like this was probably actually designing what I wanted the character to look like. Obviously, an entire species worth of brains in a jar is going to be a little bit difficult to represent in a physical way. So I imagined that they had this robotic form that would act as a physical body whenever it would be necessary to interact with things or communicate with people on a more personal level. Problem, again, was actually designing that. I wanted it to look very alien, not just a humanoid figure. I tried a few versions of this that were somewhat humanoid, but I knew I also wanted them to have several different appendages, like tendrils of some kind. And so I experimented with that here and there. Some versions of it were more of an octopus. Some of them had the tentacles that were in a more upright humanoid form. But in the end, I decided to make this pose that gave it the appearance of having 4 separate tentacles that it would use for locomotion, and then it would just have a bunch of others here and there that it could extend whenever they needed to interact with anything. And another little thing I added was that I created these smaller drones floating around in the background. I imagine they're just doing maintenance or taking stock of certain things. And another thing that I think took a little bit to figure out was how I wanted to represent the facial features on this entity, because while it is definitely more robotic and made to be function over form, I also wanted it to be capable of expressing personality, or at the very least being somewhat personable to people, because conceptually speaking, this would be a creature that would be very imposing to anyone who's uninitiated. And so I thought it was important to just emphasize the fact that this one's on our side, and to make it so that people wouldn't be afraid of them. But yeah, like I said, when it comes to serving their function, I combined the more mechanical exterior that gives this body its form. I combined that with a sort of Newtonian fluid in a way that I think it would just host inside this body and could be used to create different appendages here and there, like you see. And another thing that I added was just this hexagonal motif, because I had this idea of making it themed after honeycombs and beehives in a way, because they're capable of producing these drones here and there to go maintain the space station or wherever it is that they reside at. And then on top of that, I gave them like little references to that here and there as well, like the fact that they have antenna coming out of the back of their body next to the ports where they're actually able to produce these drones out of the core of the robotic body. And then another reference to that you'll see when it comes to picking colors. I tried to implement a bit of this bright gold here and there, again representing a honeycomb. But I found that I didn't end up liking that as much, so I use it a little more sparingly in favor of this bright orange color that I use for the more fluid textures, and these dark bluish grays that I use for more of the actual metal. And honestly, I like that a lot more. I think the bright oranges especially just work really well for the fluids, because it reminds me sort of like lava, even though this obviously isn't dangerous like lava. I think it just looks really good from a color standpoint. And then when it came to actually shading and adding the effects to this one, I had a lot of fun figuring out how some of the patterns on this substance would look. Again, I wanted them to be very alien, but also mechanical in a way, if that makes sense. It doesn't necessarily look like it has circuit boards etched into the fluid that makes up its appendages and stuff like that, but it's somewhat close. They're a little more rounded, and in a way it's almost like if you combine circuit board patterns to something organic, which I think in this case works out really well for the concept that I'm trying to establish here. And honestly, once I figured out the base design and the premise of what I was going for here, I just had a lot of fun figuring out stuff like how the light would catch on more fluid-like textures like this, or where highlights would come in here and there. And at a certain point, it just became a really fun experiment that I enjoyed making. And then last but not least, of course, I add in a couple of things in the background, like different glowing energies and stuff like that represent the closest thing to what you would call magic here, different visual outputs. And for the background, I wanted to emphasize the fact that this is sort of a living planet in a way, all wrapped up into one. And in regards to that, I also decided to name this entity Haven, which I thought made a lot of sense because Again, this character would act as sort of a safe haven, source of strategy, information, and overall I think their purpose is just to try to protect and share knowledge with whoever needs it amongst the galaxy. And to that effect, I think this came out really well, and with that, let's see the finished redesign of Haven. Now, sorry that this one's going to be a lot more jarring to start out with. I actually ran into a problem recording this last one where my power went out as I was designing it. And thankfully, the work that I did in Clip Studio Paint saved, but unfortunately because I was mid-recording, the footage that I had of everything leading up to this point got lost. So we're kind of starting in the middle here. Anyway, this last drawing is going to be the Undead character that you saw previously. This is presumably going to be our main antagonist, but again, much like I did with Haven, I kind of reconceptualized what I wanted this to be. And to that effect, I thought, what would be a more interesting way of doing something undead in a more sci-fi fantasy kind of setting? So similar to how I made the last drawing Hive Mind, this one's going to take the rogue AI trope to a sort of an interesting and unique level, in my opinion at least. For this concept, what I thought of was essentially, again, somewhere in this galaxy's history, I figure there was an alien race that were either smart enough or tenacious enough where they were able to create an AI whose sole purpose was to extend and prolong their lifespan. Essentially, it would become smart enough that it would be a master of biology and just environmental science to a degree, that it would be able to do things like cure diseases, reverse aging in some ways. But the one problem that it always ran into was that no matter what, people kept dying because that was an inevitability. But given this hyper-intelligent AI's programming, that just didn't sit right. This was a problem that it couldn't solve no matter what it was programmed to do. And so what that led to essentially was that though it wasn't able to cure death, it essentially reversed the process in such a way where it gained enough knowledge to essentially go and merge itself with those that have already passed, and in doing so would essentially reanimate them into this new state where, again, they more closely resemble an undead in this setting. Now, this was obviously horrifying and didn't really sit well with people, but again, as far as its programming was concerned, this machine life form saw this as a more perfected state of life. It essentially solved the problem it was stuck on in such a way where it essentially created a life form that now in this state could not die because in a sense it was already dead. And in reaching this point where it believed that it had solved its greatest problem, it then went to carry out its primary function in a way where it wanted nothing more than to share this solution with the rest of the galaxy, because it believed itself to be this perfected state of life that in a sense conquered nature, though it didn't understand how terrifying that was. And so I think ultimately the fate of its creators was that they probably succumbed to this life form, and from there it just spread out to the rest of the galaxy as far as it could. And that kind of sets up what I believe would be the main antagonist of whatever story would come out of this. It's not so much a direct villain in a way, it's more so almost like a force of nature, because while this being is very intelligent, it doesn't really have morality in the same way that our main characters would, so it doesn't really comprehend that what it's doing is wrong or unethical or terrifying. It's just trying to preserve life in what it believes is the best way possible, which is just converting all life into more of itself. And to that effect, I tried to combine equal parts undead and machine. I almost made this like a walking tank that's just an amalgamation of the remains of different species, as well as bits of metal and wires and stuff like that just act as stitching between those disparate elements, if that makes sense. And so that in turn allowed me to get very experimental with this design. Like I said, unfortunately the footage is lost, but I went through a couple iterations similar to Haven of how I wanted this one to turn out. And Eventually, I just decided on this big hulking mass with different shapes of appendages. It's just very asymmetrical, and again, probably one of the more alien designs that came out of this, because it's not only alien to humans, but it needs to be alien in a way that it's sort of the anathema of life in general. It is something that is a danger to everyone, regardless of race they are across the galaxy, which I think honestly would make for a really good antagonist overall. Part of that as well was just giving this entity just this deadpan stare, an absolute lack of emotion, because it's really just focused on its one primary goal of proliferating itself. Again, I sort of created this piece as an antithesis to Haven in a way, because Haven is meant to try to appear as personable as it can, as they're just looking to preserve and protect life as best they can, whereas this doesn't have the emotion or understanding of life to really see any value of that. It's just seeking to absorb and perfect everything into what it believes is the most efficient form of life. And part of establishing that horror was, again, just adding a lot of heavy shadows, not just in the design itself, but also in the background. I wanted to give the impression that there is more going on within this being, as it's just a cobbled together mess of organic and inorganic textures. So I just really wanted to emphasize the complexity of this one. This is one of those designs that I've made where I don't think I would actually implement this into a comic or however I would portray this, because it would just be hell trying to draw this over and over again. This was more so just a fun one-off, so I think it worked well in that regard. Now, when it came to actually picking colors, this is another one where I went back and forth a bit. I had an idea that I wanted a lot of the craggier textures to be more like chunks of bone that are cracking and falling apart and being held together by this more sinewy, decayed muscle texture, if that makes sense. So a lot of the colors I picked initially are like very dark and muted, because again, I wanted to give the impression that most of this is being held up by strings. Originally, I gave the idea of the more energy colors in its core were bright green, because that's somewhat of an undead or necromantic color, at least in fantasy settings. But I found as I was messing around with the colors a bit more, I ended up settling on a more muted grayish red-like color. Again, just because I thought it complemented the rest of the piece a bit more. So you'll see I transition to that a bit here, and then I add a bit more highlights, again, to give the impression that that is, I don't know if it's a type of power source per se, but similar to what I did with Gorix, for example, it's just a form of energy that's flowing through this creature in some way. And of course with this one, the background probably has the least amount of detail out of any of them. For the most part, I just wanted to give the impression that it is rising up from an absolute desolated land of decay that this entity is just conquered in some way. So it's mainly just a lot of like darkness and desolation, bits of fire here and there. And then I added little details amongst the rubble showing a bit more bones and remains of different creatures and stuff like that. And while the original character was named Titarius for some reason, again, much like the others, I tweaked that in a way and renamed this entity as Terminus, which I think just works to represent that this being, if you even want to call it that at this point, is meant to be an end of all life. It is trying to conquer and absorb every life form that it can find until the entire universe is made in its image, basically. Just because of that corrupted programming and warped perspective that this AI has. So yeah, as I finish this up here, let's see the finalized Terminus. So with that, we now have every character from the original Afterworld seeing the light of day again, after maybe 15 years or so, by my estimate. Honestly, I had a lot of fun going through this stuff and completely redoing it in a way that I feel like I can be proud with today. I honestly enjoyed it to such a degree that I might make this a yearly thing. Maybe with the turn of each new year, I go back and see some old artwork and see what I can do with it with the skills I have now. I still have various notebooks similar to that one that I just keep for safekeeping that have some old stuff in it. So yeah, maybe if you enjoyed this one, this becomes a semi-annual thing. We'll see. But yeah, if nothing else, I hope that this can serve as a testament to what a lot of time and effort and practice can do. I know, at least in my personal experience, it can be very easy to look at an amazing piece of artwork that you might find online and think, well, I'll never do that. I don't have the skill set to accomplish something like that. I know I've definitely had feelings like that from time to time, but it's important to remember that stuff like this doesn't happen overnight. The only reason that I'm personally able to do any of this is because I've been drawing ever since I think I could actually have full control of my hands. So, needless to say, this didn't happen overnight. I've been practicing this since I was a toddler, and you can see that if you continue to practice skills like that you're invested in, you're going to see improvement over time, no matter how long it takes. I'm certainly a better artist now than when I was when I made Afterworld originally, and I would say that these are even a significant improvement since the last time I tried to redraw characters from Afterworld. I think it was 2021 maybe is when I did that. So needless to say, if you have interest in art or any skill in general, just keep at it. I promise you, if you keep practicing, you will see improvement, even if it's slight. Again, it just takes time, effort, and the passion to keep at it, and if you do so, I promise you that you will see improvement that you can be proud of like this. So I'd say that's a pretty good note to end on. Again, if you'd like to see more stuff like this, feel free to like and subscribe, it really helps me out, as well as follow me on my socials here, where I tend to post the finished products that I make for these videos. But until I see you again, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.